Welcome, everybody. For those mingling on the edges, now's the time to decide to come to this session and take your seats. Welcome, everybody. I know it has been a mammothly long day today, and I'm sure your brains have been buzzing with new connections, new information, but also inspiration as to how you might want to take home all the learning and ideas that you've heard today. We're hoping that today's session, our in conversation, will do the exact same. Here on the stage, I share it with 4 amazing people who are doing some incredible work, thinking about local solutions and translating them to global lessons for us here today. I'll quickly run down. All of our panelists today are from different places around the globe, doing some incredible work, speaking from their own lived experience and their learned experience. And we hope to bring some of their strengths to you today. So we have Catalina from Romania, Kat from Vietnam,
everyone,
Muskan from India, and Judah from Kenya.
Hi.
So maybe just to start off this conversation, thanks everyone. I'm really interested in hearing your perspectives around, you're all from such different places in the world. What is your mental health ecosystem like in your context? What are some of the strengths? What are some of the challenges? I know in preparing for this conversation today, there are some key themes that we sort of talked about, and I'd be keen to hear from you about that. The first was around thinking about how the mental health context is often sort of thought of as the formal health services or formal healthcare system. What's that like for you, Catalina, in Romania?
Thanks, Natalia. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm looking so forward to having this conversation with my colleagues. So, yes, I'm based in Romania. Traditionally, Romania, and similar with other Eastern European and Central European countries, has a focus predominantly on formal healthcare, with a focus on services within hospitals, emphasizing psychiatric treatment within institutions. And young people who are suffering usually are receiving psychiatric treatment in institutions. There has been a deinstitutionalization process starting, but it's moving slow. And unfortunately, this focus on institutions, this focus on psychiatric treatment comes with lots of barriers and lots of stigma. Also, I want to say that within the public mental health system, you could have access to some free services. You could have access to psychotherapy services for free, for example, but unfortunately, the referral pathway is very, very difficult. You would have to go to the GP, and then the GP would refer you to a specialist, then the specialist would have to refer you to a psychologist, and you would only have 12 sessions for free, and then you'd have to repeat again the same cycle. So I think it's really challenging. At the same time, I think this whole ecosystem puts a lot of barriers in terms of accessibility, and it's not appealing at all for young people. And yeah, that's it in short. But I'm curious how it is in Vietnam, Kat.
Well, Vietnam is very different from Romania because we don't even have like what is called like official like institutionalized mental health services.
Okay.
We do have psychiatry in hospitals, but mostly to treat psychotic disorders. So Mental health is a relatively young field in Vietnam, and the occupational code for a psychologist actually has only been introduced in the year 2020. So really young. There are not a lot of psychologists and mental health professionals in Vietnam, and even if a person can manage to find like reliable and effective services, those services are really high cost. But actually, the cost compared to other high-income countries is low, but like compared to the income of an average Vietnamese is very high, and so it's not accessible to the majority Vietnamese. How is it like in India, Muskan?
Yeah, so in India, I would say that mental health, much like Vietnam, is a young field, but well-being has been talked about for many, many centuries through religious and spiritual frameworks. So within India, the informal systems of care in mental health are also very valuable. I would say two key elements to understand about the Indian mental health ecosystem. One is community and family. So a lot of young people still live with their families unless they go outside to study. So family dynamics quite literally influence how healthy a person is, both mentally and physically. And second is, again, religion and spirituality. So almost all young people, or almost everybody in India, has some kind of spiritual or religious teaching as they grow older. They may or may not pursue it directly, but there is, like, mental health is understood in connection to spirituality in many communities today. As for the formal system of care, the latest figure that we have is there's 0.7 psychologists per 100,000 people in India. So that's quite a big gap of care, which is why these informal systems of care are really important to the Indian context. And what about you, Judah?
Yeah, coming from a low and middle income country in Kenya, we share a lot of what has been mentioned on the stage already, but I feel like what has been unique to my country is that our government has competing priorities, as you can imagine, and most of them are not mental health or well-being and care for people. So a lot of the deficit is covered by the CSOs, the civil society organizations. It's left to us to shoulder that well-being burden. But then most of us are located within the cities, within like towns, so that we can be able to have access to internet infrastructure, apply for this grants funding and all that. But this leaves us out of the rural areas where at least 70% of our population lives. So that increases a barrier to accessing those services because we want to balance between developing the country but also meeting the need for everyone. Yeah. So our context is mostly CSO funded and CSO led. Yeah. Over to you, Natia.
It's really great to hear, about some of the similar challenges, but also some of the really diverse sort of ways that the system has been built around mental health. Muskan, you picked up before around sort of this idea of informal systems of care that have existed even before we knew what hospitals were, and before we knew how to create sort of formal workforce around mental health. But so tell us a little bit more about sort of those informal systems of care around community, around spiritual communities, around family as well. Sort of how does that play a role in the mental health ecosystem more specifically?
That's a great question, and I feel like India is such a special and unique case study to understand mental health, because even though we have severe mental ill health, but it works in its own way. For instance, in families, mental health is not talked about in Western terminology, I would say. There's quite a bit of a knowledge gap in generations. So I would say for my generation, we are probably the first ones to be speaking English, and still there's a big urban-rural divide. So I come from urban India, so I can speak for urban India. Within families, it's easier to talk about, say, emotions like anger or sadness or feeling just out of place. But if I go to my mom and say, I've been having anxiety more in a clinical sense, that I've been taking therapy, then that is something of even like offense in certain families, because we are so connected to each other at times that we tend to feel like, oh, if somebody in the family is mentally ill, then that might be rooted in something the family is doing wrong. So that's one perspective. But in terms of spiritual stuff, I can say, I can talk about yoga a bit. Like almost everybody must be acquainted with yoga. And in the West, I feel like yoga is seen almost as an exercise or stretching, right? But yoga has existed as an ancient practice for so many centuries now. And yoga has always had its root in mind-body connection, and it looks at the human well-being more holistically. So it's existed even before mental health literature was a thing. And now there's increasing researches about how yoga and breath work helps with nervous system healing, for example. So there's increasing interest in academic research about these ancient practices, which is why I feel like when we talk about mental health in India or other LMICs, it's really important to understand how does the culture interpret mental health and what have been their traditional, more indigenous ways of dealing with mental health, so that we can integrate those into new researches. What about you, Judah? Do you have anything to say?
Yes. We actually share a lot of commonalities between India and Kenya. One of the things we've seen in the community and about the informal systems is you can imagine creating awareness. We are like 55 million people, and you're telling people to go seek services, and you find that the burden of a service provider is 1 to 500. So you can imagine there's no single service provider who's going to see 500 people and be okay with doing that. So what we started seeing is that the community itself, across generations, has been forming connections, informal connections, be it a football team that has very bad library and it's this community against that community, be it that band that nobody in that band knows how to sing, but they keep meeting every Saturday and they want to continue practicing. Those are informal systems that already organically form in the community. And what they're creating is support systems that are not necessarily identified by us in the formal mental health structures. So we are seeing a lot of organic gatherings in the religious settings, in these small groups in our community. And we are trying to work on the peer support model, where we are able to teach the peers, meet the communities where they are. In those organic places, they are forming this Ubuntu-like structure and teach them on how to support themselves so that we can focus more on prevention than focusing on a lot of service provision, which will overwhelm the capacity that we have right now. But I'd love to hear more from Kat about how the informal systems work.
So before, mental health was more popularized in Vietnam as a concept. I myself found doing literature review is that people in Vietnam just normalized mental health issues like depression or anxiety as a normal part of life, and we just go on with it. And the way Vietnamese people would deal with those issues in those circumstances is that they would normally rely on spiritual services. So very similar to what Muskan just mentioned. We would go to pagodas, talk to monks, or we would go to a master an astrologer to read our destiny and give us guidance on how to move on. One other thing is that we would tend to rely on family or peer support. And one of the trends I've observed recently is that it has moved on towards social media. So instead of coming to your direct contact, people would go on social media, post that they are facing issues and asking for advice. Yeah.
So it sounds like, what I'm hearing is that really there's strength within the community, within families, within different people's belief systems that provide care and places where people gather within the existing community. I'd love to hear about sort of how does that influence how emerging sort of localized understandings of mental health and how communities are sort of co-constructing mental health as a concept where traditionally we might think of it as something more Western or something that is outside of the community, but how are communities sort of taking that back? Kat, did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So very similar to what Muskan shared earlier, our younger generation is more familiar with what mental health is, but not our parents. And so like there's a big gap in terms of like how generations communicate with each other. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
How about you, Catalina? What do you think? How is your community doing it?
So I think it's a bit similar with what Kat was saying, that we as younger generation, we are more aware of mental health and we are promoting it and we are vocal about mental health. But I feel like in Romania, at least in the past few years, the mental health awareness has increased a lot. And that's because first we have lots of very passionate NGOs and grassroots organizations that are promoting mental health, and it has started to become part of our life, right? And at the same time, I feel like there has been lots of public campaign and about mental health, which is great. And media outlets have started to promote the mental health conversation. And I would say when I say media outlets, I'm mostly talking about social media, because on social media now we are seeing a lot of information about mental health. Of course, here are some risks as well, because it is important to know how to look for the most accurate information about mental health, but at the same time, I think it's very important that we have this opportunity. So I believe that the public now in Romania and the society is more literate in mental health. And yeah, I think local NGOs did a great job to create a more open and compassionate dialogue about mental health. So yeah.
How about for you in India, Muskan?
I can share my own lived experience in this question context. So I grew up learning and following a Buddhist philosophy, which was not a religion, but kind of like an addition to just life education. And for me, before I learned of mental health, which was in 2017 when I was 17 years old, I always had a sense of there being mental peace or mental well-being because of the Buddhist philosophy. And I learned of concepts like compassion for other people or oneness of self and environment and finding like roots of your emotional problems within yourself. So all of these practices really strengthened my understanding of mental health when I did learn about it and did start engaging with it from a research perspective. I think it's a beautiful integration when you already have certain beliefs and you use that as an addition to learning more formal terminology. Like for me, learning about anxiety and depression as terms were very helpful when I was 17, but even before that, it didn't mean that I didn't have those experiences. I just had no vocabulary for it until then. Yeah.
In Kenya, and especially with the youth community, I believe we're reclaiming back our communication about mental health. A lot of the terms and terminology that has been used to describe, mental health, anxiety, what we're feeling, has been very westernized, and it's not really ingrained into our culture, into our traditions, into our beliefs. So a lot of the young people have been taking back how they communicate about mental health, how they do check-ins. And I can share like a 30-second check-in with you, which will require your participation. If I say awo, awo, you say aye, aye. Awo, awo.
Aye.
Awo, awo.
Aye, aye.
Aye, aye. Awo, aye. Yeah, so it's things like that, where young people just invent these weird things, and we are checking in, and we are now flowing into a conversation about this check-in made me feel like this. This is what I want. This is the creativity I want. Another version of IAYMH, and now we are 5 minutes into discussing what we've been doing with our week, how we've been letting go, and how we've been participating. So it's taking back the way we communicate, and as practitioners, we're taking that feedback. We are saying, if this is how the check-in works for you, then this is what we are going to be doing to meet you where you are. Yeah. Over to you, Nadia.
Thanks, Judah, and thanks everyone for sharing. I'm really hearing, sort of when we think about the ecosystems across your really diverse context, that, you know, that there is a system that's there, but there are these really core strengths within the informal systems of care, but really hearing about how communities, how through the mobilization through social media, through belief systems that have always existed, and through localized sort of understandings and language around mental health that sort of within your context, they're being adopted as well. So I would love to hear more about some of the approaches within your community that sort of utilize these strengths that we talked about. Maybe, Catalina, did you want to start off? What type of approaches have you seen or been a part of that really utilize some of those strengths within in Romania?
Yes, so I've seen a growing number of approaches that are utilizing the resources that I was talking about, and utilizing the community resources and the youth voices. But I want to talk today about one initiative that I'm part of, and which is actually an initiative that I co-founded along my colleague Sofia, who is somewhere here today. Is it called Let's See? And it is a Central and Eastern European wide lived experience network. We are currently having around 40 young people part of this lived experience network. Our main goal and our main idea is to create at one point youth mental health models that are sustainable, that have young people at the center, that are accessible, and that are culturally adapted, that are evidence-based, and that are locally informed. I'm super proud to say that we have now developed 2 working groups within our initiative. We have a research working group, and then we have a design working group. We are meeting almost 2 times per month with our young people, which are very engaged, and they are at the core and at the center of the initiative, and everything was designed from the beginning. We have talked about the vision and the mission within the community, within the network. We have decided everything together. So I'm really proud of this initiative, and I hope to see many more happening in our region.
Very exciting, and congratulations, such an amazing accomplishment, really, to be able to bring those young people together. Muskan, how about you?
So just to share like a little context behind the initiative I'm about to introduce, India has the youngest population in the world, the largest youth population, and a lot of people are online on the internet, so there's a lot of information, and increasingly in my women friendship networks, there's been a tendency to want to go offline or find some more protected spaces online where to talk about mental health and well-being. So just noticing this trend in my own friend circles, last year I started this community. It's a digital community, and do not laugh at the name, it's called Emotional Baddies. Yeah, so it's Gen Z focused, and it's women in their 20s. It's majority Indian women. And why did we pick a silly sort of fun name is because a lot of mental health initiatives are illness focused. So, what to do after you're already mentally ill or recovery focused. But whereas Judah mentioned, preventative care is also so important. And in the Indian context, lived experience understanding is so important. So what this community does is essentially, there's like different subgroups within this community. One is called Spiritual Girlies, so people can share their wisdom around spirituality and mental health. But also there's like a space to share silly joys. And it's a group that's always buzzing with people sharing pictures like cooking mushrooms, or it can be something very random and silly, basically to integrate care back into mental health, and also to integrate fun and joy and goofiness and playfulness, which is what we are meant to be doing when we talk about mental health as well, right? It's always dual, it's a spectrum, it's the good and the bad. And something we also do, which has been really interesting and helpful for a lot of women in the community, is that we do knowledge sharing sessions. So essentially what we do is, like, if it's a 1-hour session, for the first 30 minutes, if you're talking about burnout, for example, for the first 30 minutes, we all maybe read a research paper and exchange learnings based on existing scientific knowledge. But then in the last 30 minutes, we discuss how does it relate to our lived experience. Because a lot of scientific knowledge can be Western tending, and it differs based on our lived experience more traditionally in India, right? And for instance, we talk about how does menstrual health relate to mental health, which is a topic a lot of people should be talking about. For young women, it's really ignored. There's been a lot of experiences of how PCOS and PCOD increasing in young women in India is impacting their mental health. There's conversations around corporate cultures really sucking the life out of people, like burnout is major in India. So it's been one of a kind. We've only been like 5 months running, but there's already around 100 people, and people are always like sharing their experiences and supporting each other. And it's not well like studied or within like a framework to give you facts and data, but it is something to be proud of and replicate, maybe in different circumstances.
Thanks, Muskan. How about you, Judah?
How this manifests in my community stems back from our culture and tradition. Kenya is very rich in storytelling, and we are very expressive, but in the third person. An example is my second name, Njoroge, means somebody who was born at night. And this is, I don't even know what time I was born, so I don't think that actually captures that. But that's what our culture has. And this formal structure of come, sit down as I ask you about your mental well-being kind of feels detached, because it allows somebody to introspect, but maybe they do not have the words to do it. So how we're seeing and how we're claiming this is having expressive formats, artistic expressions in mental health. Even in the Maasai community, they are good at beading, making like really, really good shawls. Like we do an event where they bead up an ornament that represents how they're feeling. And this brings up a lot of expression, a lot of discussion, and this saying that, no, to me, blue represents freedom, and to someone else, blue represents like the lowest feeling that they've ever had. So these organic discussions now create that sense of community, that sense of let's talk about it, let's talk about each other, and see what our perspectives of life are. An example of this is we do it in Banja sessions, where we tell a person to come up with a story about mental health in their community. And mostly it's that person, and it's full of art, it's full of humor, it's full of all this pain, and sometimes trauma, and sometimes triumphs that they've experienced, all bundled up in one good story. But we are seeing that a lot of people are relating to it, and they are able to, if I tell you some person named X has done 1, 2, 3, you're able to come and talk to me easily about person X without saying it's you, but all this while we know we're interacting about ourselves and discovering ourselves more. So it's that artistic expression that we are getting to feed off of in Kenya, and I love it because, I can always make up a good story and have my community continue that story and help me in the process. Yes.
Thanks, Judah. How about you, Kat?
In Vietnam, I'm actually quite amazed of how responsive youth are when they are aware of mental health. So let's divide youth in Vietnam into two groups, high school students and university students. So for high school students, they would initiate projects on their own to educate the public about mental health. And it's interesting because when those students who are interested in mental health and they transition to university studying psychology, they would have a better understanding of what the specific needs of their community are. And they, instead of just raising awareness, they would be creating services or initiatives that specifically target the population that they care about, that the issues they identify. So, for example, in Vietnam, there have been like a number of workshops in the past related to mental health that are organized by youth. For example, there are workshops organized by Psy Cancer Talk. So they provide mental health counseling to cancer patients. There are also mental health aid for educators. So they would provide university lecturers and also high school teachers with trainings on how to like respond to mental health crises in their workplace. There was also a project initiated by Co-RE community, where in last year there was a typhoon Yagi hit Vietnam, and they organized a series of online workshops trying to reach people in that community and teach them on how to bounce back after the natural disasters.
So it's great. I mean, I guess like when we were thinking about the title of this conversation, it's really about, innovating from within, really diverse context, hearing about arts and emotional baddies, and thinking about student-led workshops and trainings, and thinking about lived experience networks. Like, why aren't we seeing these across Kenya, across Vietnam, across India, across Romania? What are some of the things that you feel are some of the barriers to scaling some of these really innovations from within such diverse contexts? Maybe, Kat, what do you think?
Well, for the initiatives, for the nonprofit projects in Vietnam, I think there are two main barriers. One is regarding financial resources. So because these projects are student-led, it's hard for them to apply for grants and funding because they lack experience organizing projects, even though they have a lot of motivation and they really want to help their community. And the second barrier is that we lack expertise in mental health. So because there are so few mental health experts in Vietnam, but so many people who claim to be experts, so there's a lot of disinformation going on in Vietnam regarding mental health as well. And when youth try to seek for mentors, seek for consultants for their projects, if they are not surrounded by a good network of reliable professionals, they may accidentally contact those who are not qualified to fully support their projects. And what about Catalina? Were there any barriers that you perceived in Romania?
So now thinking about the young people in my context, they are very vocal, they are super active now about youth mental health, right? But I believe that institutions are a bit skeptical when it comes to youth participation. And when I say skeptical, I'm thinking more about the meaningful youth participation, because we have some institutions that are engaging young people, but are not engaging them in a meaningful way. And we still have some work to do with the engagement of young people through institutions, and to be done in a meaningful way. At the same time, a second barrier I'm thinking about is the fact that I was talking before about the fact that local NGOs and grassroots organizations are leading change in communities in Romania, but at the same time I feel that some of them are working in silo and are not connected to other parts of the system. And I think this is a very big barrier, because if they would have been connected with the other parts of the mental health system, then we would have seen some systemical change already. So we don't have the coherent policy framework in order to make sure that everything is interconnected, the informal system with the formal system, with the educational system, and so on. So I believe this is the second biggest barrier. And I also think that we need to have a big mindset change in order for this to happen. So,
I see.
Yeah.
How about for you, Judah?
Oh, wow. I resonate a lot with what has been said already. And talking about working in silos and the funding issues that we're having is most of the funding that comes to Kenya, to the CSOs, to the government, even federal funding, is formatted on the traditional model of measurement. So how many people did you reach? How many people received the services? But a lot of this quantifying subjects are not about the artistic expression. So this leads to more competition. You know, I want my CSO to report, I reached 1,000 people over the summer, but we need measurement systems that work for our own communities. I come from a land where we have like 42 different tribes, but if we were to format it on expression, that this is how the Maasai community were able to talk about mental health in their context, this is how the Kikuyu community were able to do this, then it can be richer and now involve a CSO can be able to collaborate with someone else because we'd want to study how our cultures interacting. But this is the main barrier. We are reporting in traditional systems which do not capture our diversity. And the second one is also not allowing communities to actually bring their voice and co-author the solutions. We want to format solutions on things that have worked, which I believe is a very formal and very productive way of looking at it. But if we are coming to disrupt something that's already existing to introduce something else that has worked, then we need to account for the factors that there are going to be differences and it's not going to work the way it says it will work or it has worked in other contexts. So if we allow communities to come in and co-author their ways to co-implement and co-design all these approaches, I feel like we will be able to extend and reach more people.
Yeah.
So all of that, and also in addition, I think people are just tired. There's just so many crises going on. There's a lot of job insecurity. There's also not been a lot of rest since, colonialism. It was less than 100 years ago. There's been a lot of intergenerational trauma, a lot of migration that happened just as of last century. And I feel like when we talk about mental health as this new upcoming thing, it doesn't make sense because there's just deep intergenerational trauma, and people need some rest and space to slow down, I think. And a lot of young people do not get that. So mental health is a deep privilege. Polycrisis, like Delhi, I come from New Delhi, and we are seeing temperatures rise to 50 degrees Celsius every summer and increasing, and that is very detrimental to physical health as well as mental health. People are more and more climate anxious. So any recovery that we have done, say, in the last 10 years or so, we are again, moving to the next crisis, which is climate change or the pandemics increasing. So there's just a lot of ambiguity, and there's a lot of lack of answers and lack of questioning as well. And there's deep systemic neglect. So there's definitely a lot of deeper conversations to talk about before we can even start talking about mental health. And I feel like self-care, or this idea of individual mental health taking place before communal mental health, is something that not a lot of young people resonate with. So we need more solutions in terms of government action, political action, corporates caring about people and not just products, all of those things.
Thanks. I know I'm not sure how many of the audience have read the new Lancet Commission on Youth Mental Health, but the intro, it talks about all these different crises and how young people are living through unprecedented times. But I know maybe young people don't want to live through unprecedented times anymore. But I think a lot of those barriers that you all mentioned really resonate with everyone in the sector in terms of the barriers that we face, whether you're an implementer, an academic, a funder, a policymaker, they're really the challenges of our times, especially where there are such incredible innovations across the board. And it's really exciting to see you all, but also a lot of us here at the conference who are looking at trying to break down those barriers, whether that's working together with other people, whether that's being able to direct more funding to mental health, whether that's sort of being able to bring youth mental health on the agenda, or whether that's being able to direct sort of where things should go and how to prioritize mental health. And so I guess then looking ahead, I know it's hard to choose because I imagine there are lots of different areas, but sort of what's one area of mental health in your context that you would love to see changed or have changed within your lifetime? We might just go down the line. Catalina, over to you first.
I think for me it would be to see that mindset shift that I was talking about, and to see more focused on the community mental health care, and more integrated services for young people that are created with young people, for young people, that are sustainable over time, that will focus on early prevention, early intervention as well. And yeah, just to see more informal mental health care in my country, and to see the shift from the traditional inpatient treatment and this focused on psychiatric treatment. That would be mine. Yeah.
In the context of Vietnam, like in an ideal world, I would wish that youth who are working in mental health would have more mentorship in order to make more progress on their projects. But according to what I know, like with the limited number of professionals currently in Vietnam, they're overworked and they don't have the capacity to support youth. So because of that, I think another thing that comes to my mind is that youth from different projects should have an alliance where they can learn from each other's experience and share resources. Yeah. What about you, Muskan?
My call to action would be integrating more child mental health perspectives into youth mental health. So maybe including emotional education in schools, like what do you do when you feel angry? How do you deal with your first heartbreak? How to be a good friend? These emotional aspects of growing older, which ultimately impact you as a young person. I feel like it's really important to address in schools itself, and as part of maybe formal education systems that target both students as well as their parents, so that there's a little more awareness about mental health. And like Judah mentioned quite a few times, art therapy, artistic, creative expressions of mental health, forming little communities and understanding what mental health looks like for each community, holding space for curiosity, creativity, and ambiguity, because we will not have answers immediately. Those are a few things from the top of my mind. On to you.
Thank you, Muskan. That's an interesting question in my lifetime. What I'd love to see maybe is the format of funding and implementation in the Global South. Again, we've been having competing priorities over a long period of time. So when we're funding mental health, it will be very interesting to see it focus on a humanistic perspective and not just the mental health perspective. This is somebody who has to go to school, maybe is lacking water, is facing all this climate crisis. You're working in a low and middle income country where there's unemployment, there's all these things. So if we focus on the person as a human being, and this can be achieved through intersectionality, bringing in mental health education into the already existing education system, allowing young people to see the spaces where there's opportunity for growth and learn how to advocate and actually demand for change and create the change that they want to see. So I'd want to see a more human approach, a wholesome approach into mental health funding and programmatic like approaches when we are getting into the global south and taking into consideration that this is a person who's affected by multiple things and it's not just one project that is going to solve things magically. Because I'm imagining if we are able to create capacity for everyone to go see a service provider, then they're going to see the service provider about things they're suffering about in other areas. So if we are able to just have a wholesome view, and I think it's achievable. I think when we sit together in conferences like this, we can be able to achieve it and talk about how we are going to implement it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Judah. And I think just across all of sort of your reflections, I mean, I personally have an overwhelming sense of that we can be part of making some of these changes, whether that's connecting people together, whether that's advocating to funders around how they conceptualize, whether that's bringing young people together. And so I'm really excited for the future, but I think most importantly, I think hearing your examples of how you all have been innovating from within such diverse communities is something that a lot of us can take lessons from as we move forward into the next few days of the conference, and really encourage all the audience to come up and chat to these four and others more as we hear from the stories, experiences and ideas from others and from everybody over the next few days. So thank you so much. I'd like to, if everyone could give these guys a round of applause. We have about maybe 5 to 10 minutes for questions. So if anyone would like to ask a question, feel free to come up to the microphone. We're going to take hopefully about 3 or 4 at the same time. So we'll start from the back of the room.
Hi, I have a question just regarding how we approach mental health as a whole. The idea of mental health can be very much a westernized point of view, and I'm wondering if perhaps we're actually going about it the wrong way when we're thinking about other countries, that maybe we don't need to bring a psychiatrist to Vietnam or to Kenya, but maybe we need to have more spiritual leaders or cultural ways of going about things. What are your perspectives on that approach?
Thank you. And we'll take the question from the front.
Okay. I was wondering, how does your culture understand psychosis, and do you have culturally relevant psychosis services? Since I know that a lot of the discussion around mental health can be centered around depression and anxiety, and I'm just curious about that.
Great, thank you. And the question down the front.
Well, I have a comment. I was very happy with your speech, and I'm thinking about all the posters that shows a lot of community-sensitive approaches to mental health, and your speeches also. And my question is, isn't it the right way to treat mental health, not the way where in the countries where we don't have the resources and so on? I'm from Brazil, and I'm thinking about that. We have maybe more health professionals than you said in Kenya, but it's impossible to treat, I don't know, 20% of people with depression. Aren't you saying about a better way to treat mental health, not another way?
Thank you. So we have 3 questions. I might allow everybody in the panel to address any of the 3 questions, but we might start from you, Judah, and then come up to you, Catalina. But feel free to address one of the questions or all 3. The first is on sort of approaching mental health holistically. The second is around cultural understandings of psychosis, and the third around are community-based approaches the best way or the right way, given the workforce challenges that we have.
Thank you for the questions. When addressing mental health holistically, there's value in the medical system, but I also feel like we can supplement it with what already works. If it's people going to the religious centers to ask for quote-unquote advice or being guided about their lives, then how do we get to the spiritual leaders and train them that this is what mental health is, this is how it can manifest, and this is how you can be able to address it. But also support them with referral pathways to the medical system, especially when the situations are escalating. So I do believe it's a win-win if we work together, and also desensitize the whole thing of I need to go to a hospital. Like when I'm feeling off, it's more of where can I find my support and where can my support find me. I feel like that will be a better system to engage that. About psychosis, I love that question. I feel like I'll look for you after this. We have 42 different ways we are looking at psychosis from our own different cultures and how communities react to it. Some may have been harmful in the past, but some have been very helpful. And it's finding a way where communities actually support each other. The interesting bit in Kenya is there has been a lot of support around such situations, and they might not have a term for it, but everyone has somebody who they can think of who has experienced it and how they are able to approach it. So that will be a fun conversation to have after this. And yes, the community as an asset, I believe communities are where the solutions lie. Communities are what we have. We here are a community now, and going forward, we'll always be the community that attended the 2025 IAYMH. So communities are our solutions. It's how we develop them and design them to actually fit and answer the needs, cater to the needs of what other people present and how we can be able to support each other. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Ms. Ken.
I think that's expertly answered. Thank you for that comment, and I am not very familiar with psychosis in the Indian context, but it would be interesting to look at it from a faith-based perspective from Indian communities. As for the question on if faith-based leaders could replace formal psychological help, I think it's not so much either or, it's having the choice. People may take to both of these services and benefit from it. Some people benefit from neither of them, perhaps. And as Judah mentioned, it would be nice to have some sort of mental health education within religious leaders, especially those who might be open to it, because religious communities can be a little bit apprehensive about just science. And yeah, I feel like people should have the agency to choose. So with the coming of formal mental health, it shouldn't be like we are going around telling people that to stop going to your religious leaders. They are not as wise as a psychologist would be, because maybe somebody has really benefited from following a spiritual practice or a religion for many, many years. So it is trusting people's capacity to know what is right from wrong, but also having systems in place where faith-based, religious, spiritual leaders are aware of the consequences of any advice they may give or guidance to people who may need more help and support.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you that it should be a choice and not like either or. Because if it has like been a perfect solution, then we wouldn't have like a mental health crisis in the first place. And I think that like very recently, religious-based care has been innovated. Like instead of going to like a physical pagoda, people can like listen to podcasts. Like Buddhist podcasts, but still I think it is somewhat effective at the prevention stage, but when mental health issues get more serious, I think the role of psychiatrists and psychologists are very important because they have qualified training. And they are also like more responsible towards the people that they're working with. Yeah.
Thanks so much for your questions. And I want to go first to the question with psychosis. We in Romania, we see psychosis from a Western lens. So we are looking from the biological model at it. We don't have early prevention, early intervention services for psychosis, unfortunately. And then I want to move to the question about the holistic approach and to my colleagues have already answered the question, but I want to add that I think it's important to make use of every aspect of the community, and I think it's important to integrate every aspect of the community into the prevention and promotion process. I've heard at one point that a country is using the people that are going with the milk at houses to check to the people that are living there, to have a bit of conversation as a prevention strategy. So I think it's important to look at these aspects as well.
Great. Thanks so much for your insight. And I guess just hearing some consistency around, how we can utilize the community, how it's not just one, but sort of like bringing in all these different approaches as well. I might close off this session. I'm aware that everyone is probably also keen for an early mark, but I think what resonates with me is that, we've heard so many local solutions, local lessons, but also a question for the audience as you leave and go into the reception is what's your lesson from today's conversation? What are strengths in your mental health ecosystem, and how are they informing the approaches that you're seeing in mental health as well? So once again, thank you to everyone on the panel today. It was really lovely to have this conversation with you.